West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Breaking news tonight, the first concrete step toward consequences for a congressman who put out a photoshopped anime video depicting himself murdering a coworker and attacking the President of the United States. 10 House Democrats tonight announcing they'll introduce a resolution to censure Arizona Republican Paul Gosar. Unclear whether it'll get a vote. That'll be up to the House Democratic leadership. As for the House Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, let's just say there have been no anime videos of him springing into action to discipline one of his own. There wasn't even a silent movie or a single peep, for that matter. For a second straight day, Leader McCarthy had nothing to say at all about Congressman Gosar's video revenge fantasy, pitting himself armed with swords against Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the president. Gosar took it down from social media, but that's no longer the main issue, which is the deafening silence of his party's leadership on it, which, I mean, really shouldn't come as a shock. The GOP these days, with rare exceptions, is not a party all that keen on self-examination, especially when it comes to obnoxious and crude or even outright threatening behavior toward colleagues or the president.
Let's go, Brandon. I yield back.
That's Florida Republican Congressman Bill Posey, ended his remarks last month with the right-wing meme for F. Joe Biden. He said it on the House floor, faced no consequences from his party. He sort of did it in a lackluster way. Didn't really put his heart into it, didn't seem. Remember when Republican Congressman Joe Wilson shouted, "You lie," during Obama's State of the Union speech? That was considered shocking. He faced no consequences as well, actually, from his party, which voted back then overwhelmingly against a resolution of disapproval. As for the priorities this time, well, Republicans, including Leader McCarthy, certainly have found time to drum Congresswoman Liz Cheney out of her leadership position at the former president's bidding. Now, in her case, of course, her offense seems to have been seeking out the truth about January 6th. We invited Speaker McCarthy, of course, on the program for the second time in as many days. And just like his response to the Gosar controversy, we didn't hear anything. So it goes. Perspective now from CNN chief political analyst Gloria Borger and S.E. Cupp, conservative columnist and CNN political commentator. Gloria, first of all, what do you make of the plan for a Democrat-led resolution to censure Congressman Gosar? I mean, does that go anywhere? Does that help anything?
Well, you know, we're not sure if it's going to go anywhere. They're going to introduce it on Friday. I think it's not surprising that it comes from the Democrats. Remember, it was the Democrats who voted to strip Marjorie Taylor Greene of her committee assignments, who said, you know, this shall not stand. And they put that on the House floor. So clearly they believe something has to be done. But it's, as you were talking about just a moment ago, where's Kevin McCarthy? This is about leadership. This is about his leadership team. This is about how a member of Congress ought to behave, not about, well, gee, you know, will this hurt me with Donald Trump because Donald Trump likes Paul Gosar, I want to be the next Speaker of the House, and on and on. I mean, there is a moral obligation, it would seem to me, to speak out and say, this can't stand. This person needs to learn a lesson here. And, of course, McCarthy doesn't want to do that.
SC, I haven't heard the term moral obligation in relation to, sadly, I don't say this with any pride, in relation to a lot of folks in Congress of late.
It's no surprise that we're here. The president himself used threatening language against members of Congress, anyone he deemed an enemy, which was the media, which was intelligence officers, which were diplomats. It didn't really matter. Anyone who came across his path was an enemy, and he really riled people up to turn against their own neighbors. And unsurprisingly, they did. But there's another layer here, Anderson, which is one of misogyny. And women in any kind of public eye get this they get the death fantasies, we get rape fantasies. I've been subject of some of these, and they're awful. Conservatives really used to rail against that kind of misogyny when it came from political figures like Keith Olbermann or even Rush Limbaugh. Women, though, never should expect to get that from a sitting member of Congress. That's the shocking part, that a sitting member of Congress put out a video wherein he, in an animated way, kills a woman in Congress. It is shocking. And again, unsurprising, because no one ever expected a sitting president to use that kind of misogynistic language against women, and yet he did.
Gloria, the Paul Gosar has a long list of just reprehensible things. I'm not even talking about sort of politically. I'm just talking about just from a human standpoint. He's just been pretty reprehensible of late. I don't know how long back it goes, but I've only been paying attention to him for a year or so. But how do you square the Republican Party wanting to punish its members for voting to fix bridges and roads, but not punish them, which they're all out there in their states, promoting, frankly, but not punishing them for producing a video like this?
It defies explanation. Here they are finally getting some bipartisanship on Capitol Hill, but you have Donald Trump out there, and I guess he's the reason. Donald Trump out there saying, all these people who voted for infrastructure, you've got to defeat them. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene giving out their phone numbers. And why? Don't forget, and I was just thinking about this today, Donald Trump himself signed on to, in theory, a $2 trillion infrastructure plan when he was president, till he walked out on the Democrats because he was mad they were investigating him. But he was for infrastructure until the Democrats voted for it. And why? They don't want to give Joe Biden a win on anything. And Trump came out and said that. And so Republicans are just following because they don't know any other way at this point. And it's really depressing, actually.
So, Essie, is it going to pay off? The gamble the Republican leadership is making right now, is that going to pay off politically?
Probably. There doesn't seem to be any pain or anger or division that Republicans are not willing to exploit and manipulate to collect votes, to please Trump, to remain in power. And so I don't think there's anywhere they won't go. Nowhere's off limits. I just think, I fear, and I just know this is going to end badly and violently. And I wonder if that's what it will take for Republicans to stop turning Americans against Americans. We already saw the violence it wreaked at the Capitol. We've seen violence. Is that what it's going to take for these guys, for this party, to rediscover their souls? Because that's what it feels like. It feels like there's nowhere they want to go anymore.
It is Thursday, the 11th of November of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life, indeed. Well, it's Veterans Day, and of course, this is the day we actually get to be celebratory. We get to be happy. We get to be festive. We can be even raucous. Memorial Day is meant to be a bit somber, but Veterans Day is, it's loudly honoring our veterans. Memorial Day is where we have a silent prayer for those who have sacrificed with their lives, and thus the memory of them. Okay, got that out of the way. Happy Veterans Day. Hope you're having a good one. Well, is it a bad mistake? No, not a bad mistake. But I will say that if one's blood pressure, heart rate, if you're prone to get really pissed off about things, maybe following the Kenosha trial is a bad mistake. Maybe. Now, I did it so that others wouldn't have to. Well, that's not why I initially did it. That's what I'm saying now, though. I decided to check in because I thought just reading about it from others was not enough. I needed to get a little bit of the flavor in which many of the pundits and Twitterers were hinting at. And I got to tell you, it's rather caustic. It's rather abrasive. Are those culinary terms? Not necessarily. But it is shall we say, a worry. This trial is a worry. I know that we're putting it through the lens of our liberalism and it's coloring it. I know that. And factions on the other side, shall we say, think that Kyle Rittenhouse is an absolute hero. The judge is one of the great jurists of all time and probably should be elevated to the Supreme Court right now. Yeah, they have no problem about expanding the Supreme Court to put this Schrader guy up there. They think he's one hell of a jurist. I will say that quite a bit of a majority of actual legal professionals, experts, don't share that opinion of Judge Schrader. Is he Rittenhouse's grandpa? I'm just wondering, is he going to tuck him into bed? Does he let him take a nap in the judge's chambers? Okay, I need to take a nap, Papa. I mean, this guy's doing everything short except the only thing he hasn't done that I can figure out is actually drive him to a Burger King and get him a Whopper and cheese. There's some questionable behavior from Judge Schrader. Least of which is I made a joke, but now I'm wondering if I should be serious. How much did the cookie catalog pay for the product placement in the trial? Because I don't know. Who does that so brazenly? I know it was at a break. He wasn't reading the cookie catalog while there was testimony being presented, please. But still, if I was an enterprising ad man, I'd probably try to get some product placement on a nationally televised trial like that. And then where's the money go? If it goes to Schrader, that might be a bit of an ethical lapse. And then it makes you wonder. Ethical lapse? You have to have ethics first to have a lapse. And what I understand about this Judge Schrader is that he marches to a different drummer, doesn't he? God. Yeah, the same goose-stepping drummer. Man, this guy would be great in the Nazi People's Court back in the day. In fact, I think he's got one right now going. His own private People's Court. And I don't mean with Wapner. I'm talking about Frieslander. Yeah, that guy. All right. Now, we all suspected, well, when I say all, I don't mean an absolute, but I mean it rhetorically. We all suspected that the fix was in on the Rittenhouse trial when he was able to raise $500,000 for his defense. God. Unbelievable. 12-year-old kid gets blasted for playing with a toy gun in the snow. Rolled right up on the kid, jumped out of the car and shot him dead. He was 12 years old. Black. There's a guy shopping in, a Target? Was it a Target or a Kmart? Carrying around a gun that they were selling in there because he was going to go and buy it. He got shot dead. Cops come running in because there was a black guy with a gun. They're selling the gun. Still have the price tag on it. Well, now we find out that the police departments in Kenosha and in Wisconsin and the FBI had a list of who they considered to be leftist militants. And who comprised the list of leftist militants? Black mayors in Wisconsin. Black city council members in Wisconsin. Commies in Wisconsin. Basically any Democrat. And then he had this list weeks before Jacob Blake was shot. This was comprised because of what happened to George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests. 97% of the Black Lives Matter protests were peaceful. And then we find out the other 3%, there were a lot of Asian provocateurs in there. So let's blame Antifa and Black Lives Matter for any violence. Just reminding you, even if Black Lives Matter and Antifa were responsible for the other 3% of the violence, 97% of the protests were nonviolent. No violence. And yet it was enough for the cops to run a list of who they considered to be leftist militants and didn't have one note about the domestic terror threat that was building because of Donald Trump. Encouraged by him. Why? Well, give a cop a cookie. They're going to want all the dairy farms and all across America for their glass of milk. I told you so. And I'm going to trademark that term. I swear to God, I'm trademarking. I put the trademark symbol on it. Jokingly, but I'm serious. I told you so. I guess I'll have to share it with Drift Glass. If he'll let me. He may be entitled to the whole royalty of it. In fact, I think he does. Well, regardless, it's going to get trademarked, and the qualifying party will be paid. That'll be Drift Glass. So there. Told you so. We do have a curated show here in the Bistro Cafe as we start off in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Shall we speak about it? Yes. Shall we? Yes, we shall. Hey, that sound you don't hear is Kevin McCarthy's silence on Gosar. That's how you can tell they're a family. On the rest of the menu, the Department of Homeland Security warned that the U.S. faces a heightened threat of domestic terrorism during the holiday season. And the first thing that we're going to hear now from the outrage machine of the right-wing media is, you're calling all Republicans domestic terrorists. Not all. Come on, not all. U.S. food banks struggle to feed the hungry amid surging prices. And a U.S. district judge approved a $626 million settlement over lead poisoning in the Flint, Michigan water supply. Well, it's about time. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where coronavirus cases are declining everywhere except in Europe. And Ethiopian authorities arrested and detained some 70 aid-delivering truck drivers contracted by the United Nations to deliver food, medicine, and fuel. Yeah, they're being charged as terrorists. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will hopefully locate the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, I have to say, and I have many, many times, it really does help. And I'm not kidding, because the prices of everything goes up, costs of everything. And though we're able to pay most of it with what comes out of our own wallets, we would be unable to do it without you, truly. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds our way once a month, we're able to pool that money and then pay our bills. And we have found, after over 10 years of experience doing this, that if we pay our bills, somehow we fly under the radar, because they still use that technology. And then we continue resisting this Nazi takeover of the United States of America, because we cannot allow it to stand. And thank you for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended, because, all kidding aside, we take it seriously. And thank you once again for that generosity. We need it. I'm not kidding. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and we thank Tom for doing so. You can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. And then I get that linked up on Twitter and other social media platforms. You know who they are. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And please do, most importantly, pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., 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 etc. Okay. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Associated Press by Ben Fox. The U.S. faces a heightened threat environment from domestic extremists and people inspired by foreign terrorist groups with the approach of the holiday season, the DHS warned yesterday, Wednesday. While the Department of Homeland Security said it had no credible information on a specific threat, the agency warns in its latest National Terrorism Advisory Bulletin that mass gatherings for the upcoming religious holidays could be potential targets, including from people and organizations seeking to exploit resentment over pandemic lockdowns and recent events such as the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. The homeland continues to face a diverse and challenging threat environment, it said. Yeah, you know what? I'd first change this rhetoric about the homeland, you Teutonic bastard, you. My God. With no sense of irony either. This is the fourth time this year the agency has issued a bulletin highlighting the perceived danger from a volatile mix of domestic extremists, often motivated by racially or ethnically motivated hate, and homegrown extremists inspired by overseas groups. It reflects a shift from the focus on Al-Qaeda and other organizations following the creation of the DHS after the attacks of September 11th in 2001. Yes. If it sounds like Nazis and it walks like Nazis and goose steps like Nazis, it smells like Nazis, they're Nazis. It also comes in an environment that has been supercharged by online propaganda and conspiracy theories, as well as anger over the economic turmoil caused by the pandemic. I know, such turmoil. The economy is booming. Jobs numbers are up. Unemployment is down. And yet, the propaganda has people thinking, I'm doing so bad. Oh my God. Somehow they're still able to take their maggot yachts out on the harbor and have them swamped and sink, and then they have to pay a salvage company to fish them out. I think the economy's booming for them, and they think it's so bad. Timothy Langan, the assistant director of the FBI's counterterrorism division, made similar points last week in an appearance before the House Intel Committee. He said the threat from domestic terrorism has significantly increased in the last 18 months. Really? With the agency currently conducting about 2,700 investigations on violent domestic extremists. White people. The language of the latest bulletin is similar to the previous ones, but adds language based on recent events. It warns that foreign groups such as Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State celebrated the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and may use it to encourage violence by their supporters. Wait a second. If they're happy about it, why would they want to punish us for it? At the same time, some domestic extremists have sought to use the resettlement of Afghan refugees in the U.S. to stir up anti-Muslim hatred. I think they had to put in Al-Qaeda for, both sides. DHS has said it is working with the FBI, state and local enforcement, and foreign counterparts, and also has increased grants and training to community-based prevention programs to address the threat. From 2010 through 2020, racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists advocating for the superiority of the white race have committed 18 lethal attacks in the U.S., killing 70 people in attacks that typically focused on houses of worship, including in Charleston and in Pittsburgh, according to the FBI. Janie Har of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. U.S. food banks, already dealing with increased demand from families sidelined by the pandemic, now face a new challenge: surging food prices and supply chain issues walloping the nation. The higher costs and limited availability mean some families may get smaller servings or substitutions for staples such as peanut butter, which some food banks are buying for nearly double what it cost 2 years ago. As holidays approach, some food banks worry they won't have enough stuffing and cranberry sauce for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Food banks that expanded to meet unprecedented demand brought on by the pandemic won't be able to absorb forever food costs that are 2 or 3 times what they used to be. Supply chain disruptions, lower inventory, and labor shortages have all contributed to increased costs for charities on which tens of millions of people in the U.S. rely on for nutrition. Donated food is more expensive to move because transportation costs are up, and bottlenecks at factories and ports make it difficult to get goods of all kinds. If a food bank has to swap out for smaller sizes of canned tuna or make substitutions in order to stretch their dollars, it's like adding insult to injury to a family reeling from uncertainty. Katie Fitzgerald, Chief Operating Officer of Feeding America, a nonprofit organization that coordinates the efforts of more than 200 food banks across the country, said. In the prohibitively expensive San Francisco Bay Area, the Alameda County Community Food Bank in Oakland is spending an extra $60,000 a month on food. Combined with increased demand, it is now shelling out $1 million a month to distribute 4.5 million pounds of food, said Michael Altfest, the Oakland Food Bank's Director of Community Engagement. Pre-pandemic, it was spending a quarter of the money for 2.5 million pounds of food. The cost of green beans and peaches is up nearly 9%. Canned tuna and frozen tilapia up more than 6%. And a case of 5-pound frozen chickens for holiday tables is up 13%. And the price for dry oatmeal has climbed 17%, he said. Ed White of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A judge yesterday, Wednesday, approved a $626 million deal to settle lawsuits filed by Flint residents who found their tap water contaminated by lead following disastrous decisions to switch the city's water source and a failure to swiftly acknowledge the problem. Yes, we remember it well. Most of the money, $600 million, is coming from the state of Michigan, which was accused of repeatedly overlooking the risks of using the Flint River without properly treating the water. The settlement reached is a remarkable achievement for many reasons, not the least of which is that it sets forth a comprehensive compensation program and a timeline that is consistent for every qualifying participant, U.S. District Judge Judith Levy said in a 178-page opinion. Attorneys are seeking as much as $200 million in legal fees from the overall settlement. Levy left that issue for another day. The deal makes money available to Flint children who were exposed to the water, adults who can show an injury, certain business owners, and anyone who paid water bills, and 80% of what's left after legal fees is earmarked for children. This is a historic and momentous day for the residents of Flint, who will finally begin to see justice served, said Ted Leopold, one of the lead attorneys in the litigation. Corey Stern, another key lawyer in the case, said he represented many brave kids who did not deserve the tragedy put on them. In a money-saving move, Flint managers appointed by then Governor Rick Snyder, the ones that were appointed to overrule duly elected council members and other elected members, mostly Democratic and black. You remember those managers. In his administration, allowed the city to use the Flint River for 2014 to 15 while another pipeline was being built from Lake Huron. But the river water was not treated to reduce corrosion. Lead and old pipes broke off and flowed to homes as a result. There is no safe level of lead. it can harm a child's brain development and cause attention and behavior problems. Flint switched back to a Detroit Regional Water Agency in the fall of 2015 after Dr. Mona Hanna Atisha publicly reported elevated lead levels in children. Some critics said the disaster in the predominantly black city was an example of environmental racism. Indeed. All right, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, style over substance. Wes Anderson films have a certain tried-and-true formula that works. Not only do they look a certain way, but Anderson uses a select crew of actors to get what he's trying to do. What has made his films enjoyable are the iconic set designs and unique storylines. In his latest, The French Press, the set designs are there, as are Bill Murray, Edward Norton, Tilda Swinton, and others, but the storylines seem a bit disjointed, and the results tend to fall flat. It's the tale of a Midwestern expat in France who starts a magazine influenced by, if not plagiarized from, the Paris Review. It's not a spoiler to reveal that the founder dies, with his will calling for the cessation of publication. The film is actually 3 vignettes based on articles from the final issue, which blend dark humor, the sublime, and even a touch of action, and vary from just okay to somewhat engaging. Arguably, the most interesting is the third one, featuring Jeffrey Wright as a James Baldwin-type character who, like Baldwin, is gay, black, and an expat living in France. That one even features an appearance on a 70s talk show, a preferred format for Baldwin. However, rather than delving much into this character, this one transforms from a story about a chef into one involving the kidnapping of a police chief's child, including some animation that seems gratuitous. The A-list crew all shine with what they're given here. The problem is that there's not enough dimension given to any of the characters to feel anything about them. The French Press is a well-made, aesthetically pleasing watch, but the end result is a bit like a beautifully wrapped box with a generic gift card inside. The differences between this one and, say, Moonrise Kingdom are real characters and a storyline you'll remember. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Sarah Vitak. So many of the objects we interact with nowadays run on programming and are designed with an exact purpose in mind. We don't typically think of living things as falling into this category, but more and more, scientists are programming and designing living cells and even whole organisms. This area of research is called synthetic biology, and there's a whole subsection of the field that's all about figuring out how to engineer cellular armies that can be commanded and controlled. Cells trained to search out diseased tissues. Cells equipped for environmental reconnaissance. Cell assassins that put out hits on other cells. Sounds cool, right? But in reality, nothing is that targeted and exact.
It's somewhat limited because those cells, to date, they don't know spatially where they are in the body. Are they in a tumor? Are they in the liver? Are they in the pancreas? Are they in the brain? So, they might try to figure that out based on molecular clues, but they don't have this kind of GPS that's telling them that they're in the right place to carry out their actions.
That is Dr. Mikhail Shapiro, a professor of chemical engineering at Caltech. His lab recently tackled this problem head-on using the power of air bubbles. Their lab had already been doing a lot of work with programming cells to create tiny structures called gas vesicles. They're basically just little air bubbles surrounded by a hard shell of protein that then float around inside the cell. You can think of them like nanoscale ping pong balls.
They have a fascinating origin. They basically evolved as flotation devices for photosynthetic microbes that live in water and need to float to the top of the water so they can get enough sunlight.
Dr. Shapiro and his team had previously been able to put the genes for making gas vesicles into mammalian cells or other bacteria. At the time, they were doing this because they wanted to use it as a tool for imaging. They were inspired by jellyfish. More specifically, something that they make called green fluorescent protein, or GFP. The good thing about this protein is that it can be genetically encoded to be attached to naturally occurring proteins, allowing scientists to view them and track where they go in living cells or animals. Using GFP as an imaging tool totally changed the game in microscopy, so much so that its discovery and development was awarded a Nobel Prize in 2008.
So we were kind of obsessed about finding something similar to a fluorescent protein, but that instead of being fluorescent, meaning interacting with light, would interact with sound waves and allow us to image it with ultrasound. And sound waves get scattered or reflected off of materials that have a different density or stiffness. And air, is very different in its density compared to tissue and water and so on.
But recently, they had the idea that maybe they could use these vesicles for other purposes. Namely, by using ultrasound to intentionally burst the bubbles.
If we just crank up the ultrasound a little bit, then we're hitting that ping pong ball hard enough that it cracks and opens.
When it does, the air is released, and you end up with a little bubble inside the cell. Alone, it wouldn't do anything. But as the ultrasound continues, the bubbles expand and contract.
And over time, several of these bubbles of air will come together and join up to form a larger bubble until it's big enough that the ultrasound causes it to undergo a strong mechanical implosion.
They started by getting this to work on the gas vesicles alone. They pulled a bunch of gas vesicles out of cells, an easy procedure because they just float to the top, and hit them with ultrasound. Then they listened in with an ultrasound mic, and sure enough, they could pick up the vesicles popping.
Humans can't hear it, but the spectrum of it looks like broadband noise. So when you turn on your TV and it's showing this like kind of thing, that's what you would expect to hear if it were in the audible range.
They wanted to see it as well.
So we borrowed a 5 million frame per second camera from our aeronautics department and connected it to a microscope.
Which sounds excessive, but actually it wasn't. Sure enough, they could see the vesicles breaking and forming the bubbles, which would then pop. And all of this would happen in a matter of microseconds. Next, they wanted to apply it. So they made gas vesicles that had proteins on the surface that would bind to cancer cells. Then they mixed them up with the cancer cells in a dish and hit it with ultrasound. It worked.
Think of it as you're punching the cancer cells. So these are expanding and contracting, and they're punching and sending shock waves very locally. So that was pretty cool because, we kind of converted our innocent little imaging agent into a little bomb that we put on a cancer cell and blow it up. But we thought it would be even cooler if we could get cells to be the bomb and have those cells go in through the body and infiltrate a tumor to get inside.
So they tried the same experiments again, but this time they used bacteria that were engineered not only to make gas vesicles, but also to home in on tumors. In the petri dish, it worked. Their next step was to try inside an animal. This is where the ultrasound aspect really pays off, because ultrasound can be used and targeted to a very specific location in the body. It basically makes up for the lack of cellular GPS I mentioned earlier. So they took some mice with tumors and then injected some of these bacteria into their bloodstream. And they saw?
The bacterial cells kind of go different places around the body, but in most of the body, they get eliminated by the immune system, except in the core of the tumor, because the tumor is an immunosuppressive environment.
Basically, they were using one of cancer's key traits and adaptations against it.
And what's cool is that because the gas vesicles can serve as both an imaging agent and now a therapeutic agent, we could see with ultrasound imaging that the cells were in the tumor core and confirm that our little therapeutic agent got there and established a little colony.
Then they targeted ultrasound at the tumor. They did this in combination with a new class of cancer drugs that allow immune cells to find and kill cancer cells, known as immune checkpoint inhibitors. On average, the mice who received the bacteria and ultrasound treatment lived twice as long as the mice that only got the new cancer drugs. This is maybe just the beginning of what we can do with these little targeted missile bacteria. They might also be promising for other disease treatments, especially because you can have the bacteria carry a payload, like a drug, and then burst open to release it in a particular location.
It's a great example of Mother Nature giving us this, precious gift. And it's something that actually was discovered more than 100 years ago. The first paper noticing that there are these air-filled pockets in bacteria was published in 1895. I just think it's a neat story of going all the way from, a couple billion years of evolution to then 100 years of basic biologists, poking around at them, and now these proteins finding a whole new life.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Sarah Vitak.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
The Last Supper painted the last meal of death row inmates. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The Last Supper art project was created by Julie Green, an Oregon State University professor. Professor Green's medium was cobalt blue glaze on white china plates. Some plates depicting a condemned person's Last Supper are rather elaborate, and others simple, glazed donuts or a single bottle of Coke. One inmate had never had a birthday cake until just before his life was snuffed out. He was given a birthday cake. Another man's mother was allowed to prepare his Last Supper, and the platter shows chicken dumplings with the word mother painted on it. The recent New York Times obituary mentioned that it is not uncommon for a death row inmate to decline a special last meal, and indeed now in Texas, the state which holds the record for the most people executed, the person about to die gets only regular prison food. Julie Green's art exhibit began touring the country in 2002 when the exhibit had 152 plates. Her plan was to paint plates until capital punishment was abolished, or until she had painted 1,000 of them, whichever came first. In September of this year, Julie Green completed her 1,000th plate. We thank Professor Green for her art and the lessons it teaches us. In October, she died at the age of 60. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1887. That was the day that 4 men were hung in Chicago for their alleged role in the bombing at a labor rally at the city's Haymarket Square a year earlier. 8 men were put on trial. Although the prosecution did not prove any of the men had ties to the bombing, 5 were sentenced to die. Louis Ling died in jail before the execution could take place. The others were martyred for their support of the labor movement and the fight for the 8-hour day. 3 of those executed were born in Germany. August Spies and Adolf Fischer worked for a Chicago German-language workers' newspaper. George Engel owned a toy store. Backlash against foreign-born anarchists helped stoke public hysteria over Haymarket. The final martyr was Southern-born Albert Parsons, the editor of The Alarm, an English-language workers' paper. The day after they died, the Chicago Tribune reported on the brutality of their execution, writing, quote, "Then begins a scene of horror that freezes the blood. The loosely adjusted nooses remain behind the left ear and do not slip to the back of the neck. Not a single neck is broken, and the horrors of a death by strangulation begin." Thousands of mourners joined the funeral procession of the 5 slain men. In 1893, Governor John Peter Altgeld granted the 3 defendants still in jail a full pardon. The monument to the Haymarket 8 stands at Forest Home Cemetery, just west of Chicago, drawing visitors from across the world to remember these martyrs for the 8-hour movement. May Day is celebrated as the workers' holiday around the world in commemoration of the events in Chicago. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 51 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of about 65, which is considerably warmer than what it's been. And that's good because we need a little bit of drying out for a few days so I can get the coating. First, the walkways and the rest of patio cement areas need to be ground. And then the coating put on it so that we don't slip and, bust open our heads this winter. Don't want that. Cloudy early with peaks of sunshine expected late. Winds will be light and variable. Partly cloudy tonight. Lows about 47. Clouds... with winds light and variable, of course. And then more clouds and sun tomorrow. A slight chance of a rain shower. No, we don't want that. Not yet. Highs around 64, winds light and variable. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon continue to rise. We now stand at 240,008 confirmed cases, and our deceased has gone up again to 338. And that's the number we're standing at right at this moment. Pollen is rated as none right outside the window here in Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is good at 23 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.32 inches. Visibility is at 5 miles. And relative humidity is at 99%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 58 and cloudy. Paris is 48 and sunny. Rome is 64 and fair. Kyiv is 44 and partly cloudy. Kabul is 46 and clear. Hong Kong is 64 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 58 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 57 and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 54 degrees and sunny. And New York, New York is 53 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world. Brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Associated Press staff bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. The World Health Organization reported that coronavirus deaths rose by 10% in Europe in the past week, making it the only world region where both COVID-19 cases and deaths are steadily increasing. It was the sixth consecutive week that the virus has risen across the continent. In its weekly report on the pandemic, the UN Health Agency said there were about 3.1 million new cases globally, about a 1% increase from the previous week. Nearly two-thirds of the coronavirus infections, 1.9 million, were in Europe, where cases rose by 7%. The countries with the highest number of new cases worldwide were the United States, Russia, Britain, Turkey, and Germany. The number of weekly COVID-19 deaths fell by about 4% worldwide and declined in every region except Europe. Of the 61 countries the World Health Organization includes in its European region, which includes Russia and stretches to Central Asia, 42% reported a jump in cases of at least 10% in the last week. In the Americas, WHO said the new weekly cases fell by 5% and deaths declined by 14% in the highest numbers reported from the United States. On Tuesday, pharmaceutical company Pfizer asked the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to authorize booster shots of its coronavirus vaccines for all adults, WHO has pleaded with countries not to administer more boosters until at least the end of the year. About 60 countries are actively rolling them out. In Southeast Asia and Africa, COVID-19 deaths declined by about a third despite the lack of vaccines in those regions. WHO's Europe director, Dr. Hans Klug, said last week that Europe was once again back at the epicenter of the pandemic. He warned that if more actions were not taken to stop COVID-19, the region could see another 500,000 deaths by February.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Cara Anna of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Ethiopian authorities have arrested and detained some 70 aid delivery truck drivers contracted to the United Nations and other groups in the past week, the UN said yesterday, Wednesday, beginning when the government declared a state of emergency amid the country's escalating war and growing famine. It is the government's latest slap at the world body after the recent expulsion of 7 UN staffers and the detention of at least 16 local employees as tensions continue over what the UN has called a de facto humanitarian blockade on Ethiopia's Tigray region. Wednesday's statement said the UN is seeking the reasons for the drivers' arrests that occurred starting November 3rd in the city of Samara, the gateway for aid convoys struggling to reach Tigray. Government spokesman did not respond to questions. On Tuesday, the UN said the 16 local employees had been detained in recent days in Ethiopia's capital. All are ethnic Tigrayans who witnesses say have been swept up by the thousands since the state of emergency was declared in response to reports that Tigray forces who have been fighting Ethiopian forces were approaching the capital. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin l'âge tombe, nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme aux langues de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin l'âge tombe, nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.